webcastonelive.com, the Legislative Hour with your hosts, Art Smith and Kevin Hall.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Iowa Legislative Hour. I am Kevin Hall, joined by the illustrious Art Smith. Art, great to see you again this week.
Same here. How's everything going with you?
Very well, very well. And I'm
sorry, I was just going to ask you, has sequestration affected you yet?
No.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of.
Is my mic on?
Yes.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Excellent. I just need to turn my headphones on.
There you go.
All right.
Off to a flying start. Good job. Now, our guest this week, Senator Brad Zahn from Urbandale. Brad, good to see you.
It's always good to see both of you.
And Senator Mark Shelgren from Ottumwa. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So the big news today, education reform was the hot topic of discussion. Brad, what went down in the Senate today?
Well, eventually what happened is the Senate Democrats' plan did get passed through the Education Committee with a lot of conversations, and they dropped it, I think, a 7-page amendment on us hours before the meeting. And as I said in the education meeting today, it'll do nothing to increase student performance. But what we did, I did have the opportunity earlier in the day, and Senator Shelgren was in this same meeting. It was a subcommittee on my education reform bill, which shuts down the Department of Education and goes with a education savings account for each parent and child. And we had a long, I'd say it was at least a half hour, 40-minute subcommittee meeting. All the players were there, all the people that, of course, the Department of Education was there, and we had a conversation with them, and I had to rebut some of the things that they had said earlier. But bottom line here, the education plans that we're looking at, both the governor's plan, the House Republicans' plan, and the Senate Democrats' plan. Obviously, the Senate Democrats' plan is the worst plan. What my biggest concern is that we need to have a conversation about how we're going to increase student performance. In the Education Committee today, let me just tell you, we're sitting around the big table with all the senators, and I said, let me just tell you a story. I had the opportunity to be a guest lecturer at Drake University for all educators in Central Iowa, both small town and urban schools. And, of course, I walk into that room, and I'm kind of the Antichrist because I'm a Republican. But that was about a 2-hour class. And so we were talking about legislation and actually what they deal with on a day-to-day basis. And I mentioned to the whole committee today, I said, I went around and I said, if I had a magic wand, if there was one bill that I could pass in the legislature, what would that one bill be? And I was surprised. Not one of them said, raise my pay. 100% of them said, let me get control of my classroom. And while I was telling that story, there was Democratic senators going like this as I was telling this story. The bottom line here for me is that we're not doing anything to increase student performance until we attack two major areas, and those two major areas is the failed curriculum that's being taught to our kids. New math is an example of it, and the failed teaching practices that we're mandating onto our teachers. If we just let teachers be teachers, my bill is, you could be argued that Brad's really trying to help out the private non-public schools. The fact is this is a great bill for all school districts and all school boards that are out there, because it allows those decisions to be made on a local basis. Now, it's a very complicated bill, 50-page bill. What it is because of the federal dollars that come in to the state of Iowa to help educate our children, there are certain responsibilities and duties that have to be reassigned that currently are being done with the Department of Education. Okay. And so it's not personal for me. I really just want to improve student achievement. That's the bottom line. It gives school boards more flexibility to make those decisions because the top-down effect and the way we've been doing education the last 30 years isn't working.
Right.
And so we got to think outside of the box. And I compliment the governor. He started this whole conversation a couple years ago that we need to do something about student performance here. We operate in a whole different world than we used to. I, for one, work with a lot of people from India. In India, it is mandated that you take calculus in 5th grade. That's where we're getting.
Wow.
That's where we're getting beat here. And so I'm very passionate about education. I was very happy that the chairman of the education committee did at least have a hearing in regards to this. And I think it'll continue the conversation. And, I said, listen, my plan isn't perfect, but let's sit down. You tell me what needs to be changed. But until we give more local control, and that's what the House bill did. The House bill had a component in there about home rule. That's a step in the right direction. And there's some good aspects of the House bill as well as the governor's bill. But I really think we're not thinking we are not thinking outside of the box. So,
Senator Shelgren, your thoughts on the education bill?
I love to hear Brad talk. I feel like I get to be a spectator half the time I'm here. I don't believe we're really doing education reform at all. One of the comments that we had in the subcommittee dealing with the bill that Brad submitted dealt with the elimination of the Board of Education in the state of Iowa. The issue we're dealing with here is that it has been 30, 40 years, and we have a patchwork of state laws, a patchwork of federal laws that all think they know better than the local school boards, than the local administrators and the local teachers on how to educate. And they're wrong. It is so complex and so difficult now for the local school boards to understand what their expectations are from the federal and from the state that it takes a state school, the education Department of Education, to explain it to them and to be the mediator just so they can access the money. That's where the issue is such a problem. We need to make sure that these laws are streamlined. We need to eliminate the overlap or the patchwork we have of these laws, and we need to start from ground one. We need to actually rewrite the entire code dealing with education, making sure that we re-empower teachers to spend that time in front of those students. To me, that's the biggest issue.
This is the Iowa Legislative Hour. Kevin Hall along with Art Smith and our guests, Senators Brad Zahn and Mark Shelgren. If you'd like to join the conversation, give us a call at 1-855-244-0077, 855-244-0077. I'm sure the senators would be happy to answer any questions you might have. So what is the status of the education bill at this point?
Well, what's going to happen is there's 4% allowable growth in the Democratic education bill that was passed out of the Education Committee. As you probably know, today was a final deadline, which is a good thing because we start eliminating bills. But what will happen here is now this will proceed to the Senate floor. I assume that the Republicans will have amendments on it. Eventually, I'm even hearing rumors where they might, eventually this conversation is going to go to conference committee because you got the governor's and the House's proposal at 2%. And the Senate at 4%. So I think that, we'll get through the process and there will be a bill and it'll be disappointing and I'll probably vote against it.
And for the teachers out there, they can probably, since the House is saying 2% and the Senate saying 4%, they can probably count on at least getting 2% allowable growth this year. I know that's a topic on the minds of a lot of superintendents from around the state. So
if I were giving advice to superintendents around the state, I would say to budget for that 2%. I don't think there's a question on the Republican or Democrat side that we want to spend the money to make education a priority in the state of Iowa. The question is whether we want to do it simply to continue to fund the old program that hasn't shown growth, or if we want to fund it to a level, which is about half the money, and spend the other half of the money trying to make specific improvements to the system. And that's where I think the real discussion point has to be.
Brad, I know one of your favorite topics is traffic cameras. And can you tell us, I hear that did not survive the final.
That did not. There was an effort being done by the chairman of the Transportation Committee in both the House and the Senate in coordination with the Department of Transportation. It was a bill to limit what the cities could charge, signage requirements, and then some standards and approval process to go through. Unfortunately, it already grandfathered all the cameras that are in there. But, it was a step, I guess, I don't know if it was a step in the right direction, but it did get killed.
So we're stuck with traffic cameras, and they're going to keep adding them, you think?
Well, I definitely. This thing's like on steroids right now in the state of Iowa. I do know that there's that Senator Bowman, who is the chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee, who I talked to this afternoon, said that the conversations are going to continue on. If this bill wants to continue to be alive or to be eligible to be voted on, it could always be adopted as a leadership bill. And that's probably what's going to happen. I do think that there's going to be a conversation in regards to some kind of traffic cam legislation. I personally, after the phone call I got last night on Simon Conway's show, where the lady said that she was borrowing some cars at a funeral. I don't know if you heard that last night, but I had a lady from Sioux City.
I never listened to that show.
Right. Well, a lady from Sioux City.
I'm kidding.
A lady from Sioux City called in and said that she had gotten that her father-in-law had gotten some tickets because they borrowed cars for a funeral procession going through when of course it's controlled because there's a guy with the yellow flashing lights there.
Yeah, I didn't
and they
even think
actually
about
went
that.
in and appealed that decision, and the city of Sioux City said no.
Wow.
What?
Yes, and so with that said, the next step was they filled out their tax returns. It was their mother-in-law filled out their tax returns, and what they discovered is that there's a lien on those unpaid violations because they just refused to pay them. So, after I heard that, it just basically solidified it's all or nothing for me. I'm going to be against those things. They're unconstitutional. And the legislation that's being discussed is not going to help the situation in this particular incident. But I just don't. I mean, I'd say it's slim to none that we're going to get anything done this year because I'll be ornery and I'll have an amendment, or Mark will have an amendment to once we're in the code, in the right area of the code, then we could have a all-out ban of these traffic enforcement cameras. So we'll see what happens.
Absolutely.
Your thoughts, Senator Shelgren, on traffic cameras and what can be done, what should be done?
Well, I think what should be done is they should be banned completely. This is definitely a constitutional issue. This is a question of whether or not due process is followed. When I get pulled over by a police officer, that's the first step of my due process, my ability to explain. And if I was in a funeral procession and somehow they pulled me over and said, hey, why'd you go through the red light? And I say, well, because I'm escorted by a police officer and a flag person. They're blocking traffic for me to do this. Obviously, that makes sense.
Right.
I share my own experience with getting a phone call at 3 a.m. from my father-in-law saying that my mother-in-law had fallen and has a difficult time breathing. Okay. Well, at that point, the decision was for me to go over there and evaluate that, and I chose to run a couple of red lights judiciously. A police officer, who, if I had been pulled over, I would have gotten an escort.
Probably. Yeah.
But with a traffic camera, I would have gotten a ticket.
Yeah.
And there's a huge difference there because there shouldn't be a difference. The other side of it that we look at has to do with whether or not I, as somebody who can afford a ticket, cares if I go through and get a ticket every single day and just simply says,
Right.
I don't care, I'm going to pay the $50. So versus somebody who can't afford to do that.
Yeah.
Now, if I am in an area of the state where traffic cameras are not available, then if I get those tickets, it goes against my driving record, it goes on my insurance, and I lose my license. But if I go to an area where there are traffic cameras and the police are not enforcing it because the cameras are, then I have the ability, based on my financial wherewithal, to be able to break the law on a regular basis and not care. There's no penalty for me in my driving record or my insurance. And so what we have is we have dissimilar laws through the state, which also means that the different the populations in those areas are being treated dissimilarly, and that's also against the Constitution.
Yep.
The political world was fascinated with what was going on in Washington, D.C. last night and yesterday with Rand Paul and his nearly 13-hour filibuster against drone strikes against U.S. citizens. And I was speaking with Senator Kent Sorensen of Milo last night, and of course, as you know, Kent put forth a bill regarding drones here in Iowa, which he said, he submitted it probably too late, and obviously it didn't make the funnel, but he expressed optimism that it could be passed in the future. I mean, drones in Iowa, can something be done immediately in the meantime, or we just have to wait till next legislative session to ban these things?
Well, in Virginia, they've already passed. I think at least has passed the Senate in Virginia. I'm not sure if it's been signed into law.
I don't think it's been signed into law, but I think it has passed the Senate and the House.
And so, I mean, states are already making strides to try to limit what drones can do in their areas.
Right.
I think it's important that it's a discussion we need to have in the state of Iowa. Mm-hmm. We need to understand what the limitations of drones should be. I mean, you have the aspect of surveillance, but you also have the aspect of drug enforcement. You have the aspect of as Senator Rand Paul was looking at it, you have offensive capabilities with some drones, and that's one aspect of it. So you have the civil liberty side of it, and I agree completely that we should not be worrying about automatic traffic cameras, nor should we be worried about something flying over us, whether it be satellites or whether it be drone planes, watching the way we live.
Right. Because
that's part of being an independent, nation and having independent rights. On the other side of it, and I will give one aspect to think about. In the state of Iowa, we also have a National Guard fighter squadron. Mm-hmm. Recently, that fighter squadron funding has been eliminated, and it is now a drone squadron. Mm-hmm. So we are now going to have people who are running the drones from Iowa, and the question comes down to, should we have drones in the state of Iowa for testing, for repairs, for maintenance, for all the other things that we have in order to have the federal funds available to maintain those soldiers? And so if we were to ban drones outright, that might limit our ability to grow that National Guard base. And even though I personally would never give up my constitutional freedoms for that, it's something we have to take into account when we draft the bill to see what would be acceptable and what wouldn't be acceptable.
And he put, I believe, 3 exceptions into the bill, one being a search and rescue where mm-hmm. life or destruction of property was mm-hmm. imminent, if an Amber Alert was issued, mm-hmm. and there was one more that's escaping me at the moment, but it also put a moratorium, a ban on armed drones flying over Iowa. So, Brad, I think you were a co-sponsor of that legislation.
I was.
And I know that there's some differences when you're talking about the aspect of not having any personnel actually in the equipment, mm-hmm. like you would with a helicopter or with fighter jets or whatnot. But there should be some ways to also look at some corollaries, because we don't really expect, and I don't know whether we have restrictions on, a military helicopter spying on what's going on in an office building or in somebody's home or even a remote part of the state. It seems like it's not even necessarily an issue of the drones themselves, except for the part where the drone can be out there doing that, and it has, it doesn't create any personnel risk if it's shot down or whatnot.
Well, so, I think there's one more aspect you need to look at, because if you have a helicopter that's flying over, mm-hmm. you have a pilot and you have a spotter and you have the individuals who are making decisions, and they have the ability to have firsthand knowledge of what's going on. Mm-hmm. They can make a very human call on what the situation entails.
Right.
When you have somebody who is flying a drone or a drone that's set up on automatic pilot, mm-hmm. it is very difficult to ascertain all of the different factors that need to be taken into account there. So once again, it comes down to that due process. Do you have the ability to ration with a camera, or have a discussion with a camera on what's right and what's wrong, versus do you have the ability to actually have a witness there directly? And if someone's flying the drone, there's a possibility they could have a camera that has wide angles. They could be paying attention the whole time. But most drone pilots, to my knowledge, fly multiple vehicles. It's not a situation where it's a one-on-one pilot situation where they're paying attention across the board to mm-hmm. everything that's happening. And so that becomes one of the challenges, which is, if at a time in the future you need to have that due process, you don't necessarily always have it.
Okay.
Wow. You are watching the Iowa Legislative Hour. Kevin Hall, along with Art Smith. Our guests are Senators Brad Zahn and Senator Mark Shelgren. We are going to take a quick break. We'll be back in a moment. We welcome you to join us, 855-244-0077. Back in a moment.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
If you choose to obey the power of sin, it leads to death. If you choose to obey obedience, it leads to righteousness.
Forgiveness is just the beginning of life in Christ. God wants us to live for Him now.
And because of Jesus Christ, the gospel was preached, and you and I are blessed today because of Abraham. Did you know that? We're blessed.
Experience Truth, 99.3 FM.
Drug and alcohol addiction slowly steals a person's identity, tearing away pieces of their life little by little until one day it seems like the hope of a happy future is gone and there's no chance of getting it back. Here at St. Gregory Retreat Centers, we can assure you that there is hope. Our unique approach to recovery begins with the understanding that the dysfunction and damage caused by addiction can be overcome, not just dealt with. Don't let another day go by. Call St. Gregory today.
Fight the good fight on a Rebels Cause Radio, Thursday evenings at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time on a rebelscause.com. A Rebels Cause Radio is edutainment.
Whether you're 10, 25, 50, 80 years old and beyond, everyone needs to live within their means. I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America. For almost a quarter of a century, we've helped people of all ages learn to manage their personal finances to benefit them far into the future. When problems arise, we've got the experience you need to make those debt problems go away. Got financial problems? Call Consumer Credit of America.
The only way we come to know the Saviorship of Jesus Christ is by bowing and acknowledging that He is Lord and King over all the earth.
Jesus Christ died on a cross, paid the penalty for our sin, and by repenting of our sin and accepting Him by faith, what He did for us, we are forgiven.
Salvation is not a combination of faith and works. Salvation is by faith alone in God.
Experience Truth, 99.3 FM.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
This is the Iowa Legislative Hour with Art Smith and Kevin Haw. We have Senators Brad Zahn and Mark Chellergan here in the studio with us today. So, Mark, during the break there, we were just talking a little bit about tax policy and some of these situations where the economic development folks are anxious to try to bring new companies in and generate more jobs by basically identifying, good companies that could be successful and then giving them a break. And is that right? I mean, should the government be in the business of just picking and choosing who should be the ones that get the favors and the ones that have to work hard like the rest of us?
Well, I appreciate the question. For me, I have multiple businesses. People ask me what my profession is, and I say, well, I'm an entrepreneur first. I only became a senator because I was so frustrated about how poorly, in some ways, the state of Iowa was run. Now, with regards to picking winners and losers, I would ask you the question, which is, we may have a huge opportunity to bring a business to the state of Iowa. What about the businesses that are here in Iowa? Don't they deserve to be treated equitably?
Yeah.
And so, effectively, as opposed to legislators going out and saying, I like this company, I don't like that company, and for the most part, it's for kickbacks. I mean, for the most part, it's, I'm going to give you one heck of a tax deal to bring you here, you're going to create jobs, and then I'm going to get something out of it. Either I'm going to get votes from my district because they appreciate the jobs that I can take credit for creating, or I'm going to get a financial reward personally out of it, and that's the wrong way to do economic development. It's the wrong way to do the tax policy. What we need to be doing, which, by the way, causes legislators to lose power, is to lower the taxes on everyone. We lower the taxes on individuals because most businesses are actually sole proprietorships owned by individuals who are investing in their own ideas, their own businesses. We also have the corporate side of it, which is LLCs, C Corps, S Corps. They create jobs. But in every one of these cases, we're looking at one group and saying, we like that group, we don't like this group. And so if you are a big supporter in general of liberal politics, you might very much like wind energy. Therefore, you feel that wind energy should get a lot of taxpayer money. It should get grants and incentives and transferable tax credits. And so it doesn't really matter what they pay in a tax rate because they're going to get it all back plus more. Or you might be someone who they would consider to be conservative, and you might like oil companies. And you say, I want to give oil companies the same deal they've got. The problem ends up being is, once again, everyone's going into their niches, and you're getting this two-party system where you've got your favorites. And we shouldn't be doing that. Every business should operate on its own merits. Every business should have to follow basic economics, which means you provide a product and a service, and a supply and demand curve, and that's what dictates what you do. And the job as legislators, the job as government is for us to be as unobtrusive as possible. We want to minimize the burdens on companies and on individuals that are trying to be successful so that they have the best chance of success. And therefore, when they succeed, it's not us taking credit for it. And when they fail, it's not our fault either. It's that leaves that to the open market. So we should not be giving special consideration with the money that it's the taxpayers' money. It's Iowans' money. We should not be wasting their money by giving it to our best friends or anyone else for that matter.
So, Senator Zahn, what do you think about that?
I have attempted in the past to make some reforms that Senator Shelgren is talking about in probably the last 6 years. First of all, I'd like to see us let's just drop whatever the tax dollar, the tax credit dollar is, let's just drop that amount and distribute that to all the businesses that are here. That would be lower than the taxes. But the reality is it's probably not going to happen. What I did is I had legislation that I sponsored several years ago and attempted through the amendment process when we've had conversations about the Economic Development Authority, is that you got to recognize here that the larger corporations have attorneys that could come out and make a real nice PowerPoint presentation in front of the Economic Development Board or Authority, and they are trying to qualify for these tax credits. Well, listen, I acknowledge there's a lot of great companies out there that have gotten this, okay? But it's not fair like what Senator Shelgren said. My bill is real simple. If you create a job and you pay them 150% of the average county wage, which means it's not going to be entry-level jobs or retail jobs, you qualify for a tax credit. Now, the beauty of this whole thing is when these companies come here and ask for money, they say they're going to create X amount of jobs. Yep. Mine is so simple to track. You track it through their withholding statement because you're going to see two things on the withholding statement. A, did they create the job? Yep. And B, what are they paying? Yep. Okay? And so then you just distribute, they qualify for a tax credit. So that means a little old hardware store could qualify. You had a job, or Wells Fargo adds a job. They qualify for it. And it just levels the field and gets rid of all the paperwork. And so I think that's another avenue that we could look at, but I certainly would agree that we are always, and I was very careful about that when I was mayor, is that we always wanted new businesses in Urbandale. But I'll tell you, I many times talked to my council and said, we need to be taking care of the businesses that are here. Because it's a heck of a lot harder to go get those businesses and replace them. Yeah. And bring those new businesses. It's a lot better to have the businesses we have expand.
Yep.
So the situation last year with the Department of Economic Development gave, I think, $250 million for the fertilizer plant in Lee County. Yep. If it was up to you gentlemen, that never would have happened?
That's correct. I would not have used the tax base in order to incentivize a company to come to Iowa, but I do recognize that because we haven't done our job as legislators and made a more equitable field with regards to income tax and property tax, that's the reason that we have to keep playing these games, and we need to fix that, and we just haven't done it.
What is the Economic Development Board's current spending authority?
I believe we just reauthorized them at $185 million. I think that's what it is.
Wow.
Yeah.
What about a fair tax? Do either of you guys like the fair tax? Is it where it would basically eliminate all taxes except put a 23% sales tax on items that you buy? Any thoughts on the fair tax?
I wouldn't have a problem with it necessarily. I mean, you got to be somewhat careful when you do a sales tax style of revenue generation. They usually call it a value-added tax or a VAT. The only issue you run into with that is as a manufacturer, at what point, because what I'm doing then is I'm not going to have as many processes because I don't want to have to track all along the way.
So I mean the fair tax. I know that the value added tax drives you down that path, but the fair tax actually is just the point of consumer purchase on new products. So then those types of things aren't impacted.
Correct. And if it was a retail directed tax. In general, I would be supportive of it, especially at the federal level. At the state level, we already take in more revenue than we spend at this point, partially because of we've been more fiscally conservative lately.
Right.
And what I'd like to see us instead get rid of a lot of the tax loopholes we have on income tax.
Right.
And I think that would allow us to have either a flat tax or even no income tax. I mean, the most successful states in the country right now actually have no income tax.
Right.
The Senate Democrats put forth their budget last week, and we talked about it with Senator Whitfer and Senator Zahn last week, where it's basically they want to spend $200 million more than what the state's taking in. But if you listen to the Senate Democrats talk, they're saying, "Oh no, we only want to spend 94% of the budget." Can you explain what they're talking about? Because I think they want to spend all one-time money and everything we have.
Partially that's true. I mean, effectively what you had in December, they made an estimate, the Revenue Estimating Committee made an estimate on how much money the state of Iowa would get in. And that is the estimate we are supposed to work off of as legislators. Since then, it has been revised, and it's been revised up substantially. And effectively what the Democrats have decided to do is they like that number better, and so therefore they're trying to utilize that number as the one they're working off of, even though legally we're supposed to be using the December numbers.
Okay. Brad, your thoughts on the budget and that the Senate Democrats proposed?
All budgets I've seen are spending too much money. I truly believe we could have a sharper pencil. Obviously, the Democrats and their spending is on steroids. They grow government, and what happens if we have a drought this year? What happens if there's any more natural disasters? What happens if the economy beans go down to $6 and corn goes down to $2.50? There's a lot of what ifs in there, and that's what got us in trouble before. And personally, I know I'm very happy that there's been some changes, but they've been very minor changes. And the untold truth that's out there is that all the budgets that are being proposed, all three different groups that are proposing, are spending more money than we've ever spent in the history of the state of Iowa. My biggest concern is that if we ever send people to Washington, D.C. that have the guts to make the tough decisions and live within their means, the first place they're going to start is the states, cutting back. Right now, we are getting 6.6. Who knows where we're going to end up this year? $6.6 billion. Another $6 billion comes from the federal government.
Right.
And there's the big part of the argument on the Medicaid expansion. But I really think we're spending too much money. I personally believe, and I'm not governor and I have no intention to be the governor, that we could cut $1 billion out of this budget if we just become more efficient in the way we deliver our services.
David Roederer from the Department of Management held a press conference today and kind of went over all the implications of the sequester. And basically he's talking about only, 4%?
0.4%.
0.4% of that $12 billion budget. So, I mean, really, with all the hype about the sequester, really, we're not going to feel any kind of impact, at least in the immediate future.
When you look at the actual numbers from the sequester, you've got about $85 billion over a 10-year period that they are going to cut. Okay? And so it was trivial. I take it back. That might not be the case. It might be $85 billion a year.
Yeah.
It is a year.
It eventually be $1 trillion.
Right. So, but it's $85 billion a year. But that number resonated with me because the Fed prints just about that $85 billion a month. So really, we're only 1/12 of what the Fed prints per year is what we cut. So it's not a cut in actual expense. It's just a slight change in the trajectory of how much extra we're spending.
Yeah.
And that's what I don't think most people realize. The sequester itself has pretty nominal impact, other than there's certain defined programs that end up getting hit because they weren't protected.
Well, and we can tell that it's not having a big impact on the folks in Washington because they're continuing to spend money. And last night, the president had dinner with a number of Republican senators and at a very posh restaurant. I don't think they get it. I really don't think that it sinks in for them at all.
It's 8% of the $1 trillion that is our deficit spending every year. That's a lot of money, but really they're not doing the hard work that needs to be done for the younger and the future generation.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's not even a cut. It's a small reduction of the spending. It's not even a cut.
Right.
In,
yeah.
I mean, can we actually cut the size of government in Iowa? Can that be done? I mean, Governor Branstad did campaign on that 2 years ago, but the budget continues to get bigger every year.
Well, he would tell you that he has cut the size of government only because there's less employees.
Okay.
But you're correct. It's one of those things where, when I ran on a policy of trying to be a fiscal conservative, making sure that our budgets were in line. And I will have been a senator during the 4 largest budgets in the state of Iowa's history. So even with that, we as legislators, when the money's there, it's like little kids with mom and dad's credit card. If there's still a limit left, they're going to go ahead and try to spend it. That's why it was so important to me that the surplus that we have be utilized in a manner that long-term changes the curve of how much money we take in from taxpayers or is given back to taxpayers directly. Because as long as we have access to that money, we will find a way to spend it.
Yep.
Brad?
Well, excuse me. When I was mayor of Urbandale, I was in a situation where I wanted to cut the tax rate because I knew that would generate business. We got it down to the very bottom, the lowest in the metropolitan area, and guess what started to happen? Businesses started coming out to Urbandale. We cut the red tape, and then we cut that. How I did it is I ran, and I get in arguments with people on the floor, I ran that city like it was a business. I went to the private sector and asked them if they could provide the same service as what we provide. And the example is our lawn cutting of all of our parks. If you know anything about Urbandale, we got parks and trails everywhere.
Yep.
And we went to the private sector, and this is just an example, and saved darn near $400,000 per year. Now, that was tough because we had to eliminate some jobs. There is no reason why Iowa is in the printing business. There is no reason why Iowa is in so many other areas that the private sector could provide this same service, only better and cheaper. And these are some of the things that we need to talk about. We were talking about the companies and the corporate welfare that's going on there. I mean, they're good companies. We want them here, but there's got to be a more fair, equitable way to do that. And I just believe that we could, if we got a sharp pencil out, if we were forced to do that, if our revenues went down that, which we are forced by law, and we had to cut $1 billion out, we would get the job done. It would be painful, but we'd get the job done.
But the problem is that you have people that aren't under the same constraints as a business and don't have to look at the revenue as something that is something they want. First of all, they want a product that they can sell, right? And the state just basically is, they're always the one that provides the service. So the customers, the citizens, are stuck with it. And the government gets to set the price. And, it's driver's licenses and vehicle registrations and things of that nature. They are what they are. If the state came back and started charging us twice as much for vehicle registrations, you know what would happen? Nothing. We just keep paying it.
Right. We talk about the budget. We educate, we medicate, and we incarcerate. There's where the money goes. The 800-pound gorilla in the room is education expense. I just got figures this week. $4.6 billion is spent on K through 12 in the state of Iowa if you figure in the federal dollars. But it's record spending every year with performance going down. I mean, these are some of the things that we need to have a conversation about.
You are watching the Iowa Legislative Hour. Kevin Hall along with Art Smith and our guests, Senators Brad Zahn and Mark Shelgren. Coming up, we're going to talk about voter ID. The Democrats say there is no voter fraud in Iowa. The Lynn County Auditor, I think, has a different take on that. We'll talk about that and social issues at the Iowa Legislature. Coming up next. Stay with us.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Drug and alcohol addiction slowly steals a person's identity, tearing away pieces of their life little by little until one day it seems like the hope of a happy future is gone and there's no chance of getting it back. Here at St. Gregory Retreat Centers, we can assure you that there is hope. Our unique approach to recovery begins with the understanding that the dysfunction and damage caused by addiction can be overcome, not just dealt with. Don't let another day go by. Call St. Gregory today.
The dawn of a new era begins.
Well, hi, I'm Rob Spearman. I'm a broker-owner of RE/MAX Real Estate Concepts in Des Moines, Iowa. Give us a call if you're looking at buying or selling a home, or if you're having trouble on your mortgage payments or looking to purchase foreclosures. We have the agents to help you, experienced, outstanding agents. Our office number is 515-276-2872. Or if you'd like to look at homes, go to our website, homeconnectusa.com.
Whether you're 10, 25, 50, 80 years old and beyond, everyone needs to live within their means. I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America. For almost a quarter of a century, we've helped people of all ages learn to manage their personal finances to benefit them far into the future. When problems arise, we've got the experience you need to make those debt problems go away. Got financial problems? Call Consumer Credit of America.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Iowa, this is the Iowa Legislative Hour. Kevin Hall along with Art Smith and State Senators Brad Zahn from Urbandale and Mark Shelgren from Ottumwa. We are powered by Webcast One Live. If you'd like to join the conversation, still have about 15 minutes left. 855-244-0077. Just got some news regarding the pay for state employees. And Senator Zahn, it looks like Governor Branstad at least got his way partially, as there will be no pay increase for ASME employees.
Well, when we were taking the break, I was checking an email from our staff, and it did show that what was agreed upon through the arbitrator is that there was be a zero increase for state employees. However, I guess the area that the governor gave in on was the paying for the health insurance.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
100% state employees will get their health insurance paid, and full disclosure, so does the legislature, and I think that we should be set an example and start with paying for 20% or whatever that number is for our health insurance. But I'd say that both sides sounds to me like it was a compromise, and so we'll see what happens.
Mark, your thoughts on that deal?
Well, it sounds like it's about the best that the governor could ask for, and I think that the ASME probably got majority of what they wanted. I think that healthcare was a big deal for them,
right?
And so I guess they say if no one's happy, then it's probably a good deal.
Of course, we hear the Democrats say all the time, as I alluded to before the break, that there's no voter fraud in Iowa. Well, it turns out Tuesday night in Lynn County, of course, they had the special election for the proposed casino there. Someone is alleged to have done voter impersonation, walked into the polling place, said, I'm so-and-so, and then that person showed up later, tried to vote, and they were already checked off the list. So it is legitimate. The Lynn County auditor reported it to Secretary of State Matt Schultz, and now the Lynn County sheriffs are looking into it. Voter ID, is that going anywhere in the legislature this year?
Well, my answer is I hope it is. But I don't think Senator Gronstall will allow that to happen.
Right.
I'm asked about that all the time. The question is there voter fraud in the state of Iowa? Absolutely, there's voter fraud in the state of Iowa. Is it as bad as places like Illinois or Pennsylvania? Probably not. But you know what? Even if there's a few cases of voter fraud, it's important. We don't want to have a situation where our votes are diluted. We don't want to have a question on whether or not someone was legitimately elected or not. I speak from an election where I had over 20,000 people who voted, and I won by 10 votes.
Right, after some legal wrangling and everything
else. And the challenge I ran into is when we were trying to make sure that the recount was done in a fair, equitable way, we actually found 30 suspected ballots, fraudulent ballots, in Davis County alone. Well, that's 3 times the amount that I was elected by.
Yeah.
And that's of concern to me. I want to make sure that there is no question about those things because we should never question whether or not our elected officials are legitimate.
Right.
We should make sure that's done. And I'll just be blunt because I like being blunt. Republicans in general want voter ID. Mm-hmm. And the reason we want voter ID is because we don't want cheating in elections.
Exactly.
Well, guess what? Democrats don't want voter ID. And they'll say it's because they don't want to disenfranchise people. I got news for you. If there's cheating, you live in Illinois, it usually benefits the Democrats. And I think they're afraid of losing that potential edge.
Well, there's a woman in Ohio, a longtime poll worker, who has admitted to voting twice last November, and they think she might have voted up to 6 times. I mean, here's the thing. We don't know how widespread it is because it's so easy to do. You could go into a polling place, say you're so-and-so who lives here, they don't check your voter ID, and then if that person that you're claiming to be never shows up, how are they going to find out? I mean, it's an easy thing to do without, taking the 5 seconds to show an actual ID.
Yep.
Go ahead, Mark.
I was just saying, there used to be a situation where integrity meant a lot to people. The integrity of the vote, the integrity of the citizen, the integrity of the elected official. And as a society, we seem to be losing that integrity side of it. And so, we either need to find a way as a society to get our integrity back, or we need to make sure we implement rules realizing that integrity is being lost.
The last thing we want to do is discourage anyone from voting.
Right.
And I think that's what their argument is. There is all kinds of flexibility that can be put into place there. The example that happened in Lynn County happens all over the place. When I was running for Congress, we had all kinds of allegations, and in particular Powesheet County with Grinnell College. I understand that, we're just saying, just show an ID. That's all you have to do. It's not like anything and the other thing about it is the Des Moines Register did a poll on this, and
71%
overwhelmingly want IDs to be shown at the. That's what makes this country a great country, is our election system. And it's always been clean, and this is just something that I think that we need to do, and I hope that there's a vehicle that we could try to amend or at least do something with this. So,
Social conservatives in Iowa have been watching this year's legislative session very intently, and I think it's safe to say they're going to be disappointed. Marriage amendment not going to make it out of the funnel. There's a couple of personhood bills in the Iowa House. Neither one of them are going to survive. Ban on telemed abortions not going to survive. I mean, what are your guys' thoughts on what can be done to protect, for one, the sanctity of life? Let's start there, because that's a very hotly discussed debate going on among conservatives about, some people want, pretty much the all or nothing approach, personhood or nothing else. And there's even competing personhood bills out there. Senator Shelgren, I'll start with you.
Well, you asked the question of what can be done. I don't always just take a fight on because I think I can win it. Sometimes the fight's worth the fight, even when the outcome is going to be predetermined.
Right.
With Senator Gronsdahl, there will be no social conservative bills that'll make it through the Senate.
Right.
And we recognize that. We've dealt with it for the last 2 years. And I made the comment earlier that elections have consequences. We as Republicans screwed up the last election cycle bad enough that we're not in the majority.
Yep.
And because we're not in the majority, we will deal with this for at least 2 more years and not get through some very important aspects of a conservative message and conservative bills. And that's what happens when you don't have people who are unified. You don't have a clear, concise message. You lose elections, and when you lose elections, you pay the price on not improving the state. And there's a lot of areas. I'm very disappointed in quite a few areas. I think education is one we've talked about a lot. It would have been really nice to have a great education bill going forward that would truly improve and change the way we've been doing education. As it is right now, it's going to be watered down, it's going to be lukewarm, tepid, and it probably won't do much of anything other than spend money.
Senator Zahn, I've been kind of alarmed at what's going on in the pro-life community in Iowa, because you have different factions of people who want to protect the sanctity of life, and they're kind of tearing the whole community apart. Just your thoughts on the debate going on there.
Well, I mean, you could clearly see there was a demonstration at the pro-life rally here a couple weeks ago, and we talked about a couple bills that I had. We all want the same thing in the end. We want Roe versus Wade overturned. We want to make sure that abortions are outlawed in the state of Iowa.
Move a little closer to the mic, I think.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
But anyway, I do believe that you will get something done. It's not going to happen now. I believe there's momentum. To answer your question, I hate to see this going on. I'm going to always vote for legislation if it saves one unborn child. Yep. Even though it's not pure but I'm not going to, the some of the bills that are out there, that's fine. But I do believe, we almost had an opportunity, we didn't because we were in the minority, but on late-term abortions here a couple years ago. And that wasn't pure, but it still is an opportunity that we could have saved some unborn lives from being slaughtered. And the other thing is the House they're the majority.
Yeah.
It's disappointing to me that something didn't come out of there. I mean, it's a new legislative session. It's not. I understand if we were year 2 in our legislative assembly or session, but I think it's disappointing that they could not get anything out of there. And probably the reason why is about what you talked about. You've got different fractions of the caucus that are that are in different places. But we all got to get together and think about saving lives. Is what we got to do.
Yep.
Absolutely.
There's a bill that's been suggested the past few years, and it relates to DNA. And in regards to if someone is arrested, and the latest bill, and I have not looked at it this year to see what's going on with it, it would require a DNA sample for anyone who is arrested for an aggravated misdemeanor and then on up to a felony. I think if you're convicted for a felony, they take a DNA sample and put it in a database. But there's an effort to expand that, and they think that it would be a useful crime-fighting tool. Of course, civil libertarians have an issue with that. So, Senator Shelgren, I wanted to get your take on that. I mean, if you get arrested, you got to give fingerprints. So, what do you think about expanding the DNA database?
Well, my personal feeling about it is if you're arrested and and even for fingerprints, okay, taking a fingerprint is one thing because it is an imprint just like taking a picture. Taking someone's DNA is something that is of private property of theirs. I do not agree that they should be able to take your DNA unless you are convicted.
Okay.
Now, if you're convicted, it's a whole different issue. You have, because of that conviction, you have given up your rights and some of your citizenship rights. I also believe that if they currently have taken DNA from people who were then later on shown to be not guilty, that information should be returned to them. They should not be automatically put into a database because somebody fraudulently made a claim against them, or you never know what the situation is.
Right.
Just because someone's convicted doesn't mean they didn't do something that was deserving of it. But that's not how our legal system is set up. Our legal system is set up so that there is no cruel and unusual punishment, and that we make the assumption that someone is innocent. It was so important to our founding fathers that we had individual liberties, individual rights, and they would not be infringed upon, that they wanted to make sure that it wouldn't be a situation simply where you could have a claim made against you and you would lose your rights. And I think the DNA just expands that issue because I doubt they currently give your DNA sample back to you if you are actually let go and said, well, you're not guilty. Sorry about this. We made a mistake. They keep that DNA on file, and that's a problem.
Brad, your thoughts on that? The crime fighters, or law enforcement, they say it would be a useful tool, and some states have enacted it. What do you think?
There's nothing more than I could add to what Senator Shelgren said. It was brilliantly said. This is a new area. I'm not familiar with the bill, and I certainly have reservations about that bill.
Okay. Art, you want to?
You want me to jump on that topic? Or?
No, we got about 4 minutes left.
Sure. One thing that just in terms of activity today, there was some committee work today on a bill, Senator Shelgren, that you were involved with in the Senate Economic Growth Committee. 274 on the Iowa Technology Prairie.
Yes.
What's an Iowa Technology Prairie?
I think it is some Iowa Democrats' concept for something to compete with Silicon Valley.
Okay.
And my initial reaction to it is they should look at what's going on with Silicon Valley because it's falling apart right now.
Yeah.
And if we continue with our tax code the way it is in Iowa, we'll be in the same position soon.
Yeah.
We need to improve the taxation because Governor Branstad recently went to California looking for companies from the Silicon Valley to encourage them to come to Iowa. And the only way that they're going to make that move and invest the money into Iowa instead of going someplace like Texas, which has a much better economic situation and has a much better tax code, is for us to be able to offer something competitive. This simply is a way that Democrats want us to give taxpayer money to companies that are in high technology fields into fiber optics to incentivize them to hire skilled workers in the area and create this technology prairie that they're talking about doing. Once again, it's basically taking taxpayer money and giving it as a gift to a company to incentivize a behavior you're hoping to create, as opposed to something that on its own merits would be created anyway.
This is funnel week, which basically means bills either die or they pass out of committee. Are there any bills in particular for you gentlemen that you're glad have survived so far, or any that that we haven't discussed already that you're really disappointed did not make it out of committee?
I'm not sure I would say there's a bill that I'm either excited or disappointed in. I know there was another bill in the economic development which allowed, this is interesting, it basically mandated that the Department of Cultural Affairs has an exhibit to celebrate Juneteenth,
Yep.
which is a Texas holiday celebrating the emancipation of slavery,
right,
or the ending of slavery. Okay, well, this is a very cool event. I'm not sure why we'd be mandating a holiday and an exhibit at a museum for it. And I am looking forward to that coming to the floor so that we can maybe add some other holidays that I, as a Christian, would love to see added to this rolling exhibit, which I think might surprise some of the Democrats.
And there is a big Juneteenth celebration every June in Iowa at Evelyn Davis Park, I believe it is.
Yes, it is.
Which is a great event. I've been there a couple years ago. So. Brad, your thoughts on the funnel week and what transpired?
There is not one bill that I'm happy that survived. We've done a poor job this year of doing any legislation that's going to be good for Iowans.
Wow.
Specifically talking about the Iowa Senate. It's just been very disappointing. What's very frustrating is the code books, I've been told, as little as 20 years ago, was about this big. Now the code books are about this big.
Yep.
And I always believe that the longer that we are in session, the more pain we inflict on every Iowan's life. And we have all kinds of bills, nanny bills, to try to protect the public. And it's just really unfortunate that there just has been nothing. We haven't done property tax. We haven't done anything with income tax. We haven't done anything really we haven't done anything good on education reform. And the list just goes on and on.
I would agree.
Let's not end the show on a downer, because that definitely was. Since we put Senator Zahn on the spot the last 2 weeks,
sure,
it's Senator Shelgren's turn.
Okay. Let him have
because
it.
You were mentioned in the Des Moines Register article that Jennifer Jacobs wrote regarding potential U.S. Senate candidates. And we know Brad is considering it.
Right.
What is your thinking in regards to potentially running for this seat?
Well, I was trying to throw Jack Whitford under the bus. No, I say that in jest. I also am considering it.
Okay.
I have had the discussion with my wife, and she has been very supportive. And at this point right now, I just want to make sure that at the federal level, we have somebody who has integrity, who has conservative values, and isn't afraid to stand up and fight for those values. And if we have somebody who stands up for that, I will support them. And if we don't, then I'll have to give it a lot more consideration on running myself.
So could we see a Shelgren-Zahn primary? Could this be like the prelude to that right here on this show?
I think we should next week plan on a debate between these two gentlemen. Just to
I want to tell you something. There is no one that has more integrity in the Iowa Senate than Mark Shelgren. Mark Shelgren would be one incredibly great U.S. Senator, not to mention it would be very entertaining. But he is a great guy, and I agree with everything he said, and I would definitely support him if he decided to do that.
And I feel the same way about Brad.
That is a great way to end the show.
Excellent.
Art, thanks again for a great show this week.
You bet.
Senator Brad Zahn, Senator Mark Shelgren, gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you very much.
This has been the Iowa Legislative Hour. I'm Kevin Hall. Have a great night.